All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling a massive question. How do we actually fight income inequality? Now, we all kind of think we know what works, but a brand new global study, and we're talking data from 151 countries over the last 40 years, well, it gives us some seriously surprising answers. So let me just ask you, when you think about shrinking that gap between the rich and the poor, what's the very first government tool that pops into your head? For most of us, it's pretty much always the same thing. And yeah, there is. The idea that the most powerful weapon we have against inequality is a progressive tax system, making the wealthy pay a higher percentage of their income. It's at the heart of so many political debates, it's all over the headlines. But what if the data tells a completely different story? This is where things get really interesting. This new research doesn't just poke holes in that assumption, it pretty much blows it up. To really get why this is such a big deal, we need to make sure we're all on the same page about one key concept. And that concept is redistribution. It sounds kind of jargony, but it's simple. It's just a way to measure how much a government's actions, taking in taxes on one hand and giving out money and services on the other, how much that actually evens things out. So the study asked a really basic question. Which part of that equation, the taxing or the spending, does all the heavy lifting? Okay, get ready for this, because the answer is pretty wild. The study found that the entire tax system, all those complex, progressive tax codes we argue about constantly, only accounts for about 10% of the total reduction in inequality. Just 10%. So if taxes are just 10% of the story, what in the world is the other 90%? Well, it's government transfers. A whopping 90% of all redistribution comes from direct spending. Think about what that means. Our debates shouldn't just be about how much money we take, but about how and where we spend it. So what are these super powerful transfers anyway? They're not some abstract economic idea. We're talking about direct investments in people. It's the public money that pays for a kid's education or family's doctor visits. It's the social safety nets, stuff like unemployment benefits or food programs that are there to catch you when you fall. That's where the real power to fight inequality seems to be hiding. Okay, so that 90-10 split is huge, but, and this is a big but, it doesn't look the same everywhere you go. The way this whole thing works plays out very differently across the world, and it creates this huge divide that lines up almost perfectly with how rich a country is. When you dig into the data, a really fascinating pattern just pops right out. As countries get richer, their tax systems don't really get any more progressive. That's kind of flat. But what does change, and changes a lot, is their spending. As a nation's wealth goes up, their spending on transfers shoots way up. Richer countries build bigger welfare states, and that's what's really driving the increase in redistribution. And believe me, this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Look at the massive real-world impact. In Western Europe, the amount of money and services being transferred to the poorest half of the people is equal to about 11% of the entire national income. Now compare that to Africa, where it's only about 3%. That is a gigantic difference in the resources being used to lift people up. And here's maybe the toughest pill to swallow. This gap, it isn't closing. Over the last 40 years, while redistribution has shot up in wealthier places like Western Europe, it's pretty much flatlined in places like Africa. The divide is actually getting wider. So this global divide brings us to the final, and I think most profound discovery of the whole study. It suggests that maybe we need to look past what governments do with money and start looking at the economy before they ever get involved. And for that, we need a new word, pre-distribution. All this means is the inequality that exists straight from the market, from wages, salaries, investments, before a single tax dollar is paid or a single benefit check is sent. You can think of it as a country's inequality starting point. So let's put it all together. You take everything a government does, the taxes, the transfers, the whole shebang. How much of the final difference in inequality between countries can all that stuff actually explain? According to the data, only about 20%. Yeah, which means the other 80%, an overwhelming 80% of the variation in final inequality we see all over the world, comes down to pre-distribution. It's almost all about the starting point. The study's author really hits the nail on the head. They put it like this. Countries with the highest pre-tax inequality also end up with the highest post-tax inequality. In other words, where a country starts on the inequality ladder is almost exactly where it's going to end up. Government action can smooth out the roughest edges, for sure, but it rarely changes the big picture. So that just leaves us with this huge question, doesn't it? We spend so much time and political energy fighting over these post-tax solutions.
But if the pre-tax world of market incomes matters 4 times as much in deciding where we end up, what does that mean for policies that shape those incomes from the very beginning? Things like the minimum wage, the power of unions, or even just access to a good education. Where should we really be focusing our energy if we want to build a more equal world? A lot to think about. Thanks for joining me.